There's this one verse in the Bible that has for centuries caused some serious fear. It's a passage where Jesus seems to turn away people who were absolutely certain they'd be welcomed into his kingdom. So what is actually going on here in this super challenging passage? Let's get to the bottom of it. And here it is. Wow. Stark, uncompromising. You have people coming to him saying, "Lord, Lord, look at all the amazing things we did in your name." And Jesus's response is just, "I never knew you." I mean, it is chilling, right? And it immediately makes you ask this terrifying question. I mean, who on earth could he be talking about here? Are these true believers? Are they fakes? It's the kind of verse that can create some deep, deep anxiety. But here's a thought. What if we've all just been missing the clues? What if Jesus actually made it incredibly clear who he was targeting, but we've just lost the original context? Let's see if we can dig it up. Okay, so to really get this shocking conclusion, we have to rewind and look at the beginning. You see, this verse doesn't just pop up out of nowhere. It's the grand finale of Jesus's longest and most famous teaching, what we call the Sermon on the Mount. And this sermon, well, it has a very specific goal. So one of the biggest clues is a phrase Jesus uses to kind of bookend the whole sermon, the law and the prophets. Now, for his first century Jewish audience, this was like simple shorthand for their entire scripture, the Old Testament, which they called the Tanakh. So when Jesus says he didn't come to abolish the law but to fulfill it, he's actually using a pretty common Hebrew way of speaking. What he's basically saying is, hey, I haven't come to get the scriptures wrong. I've come to show you what they really mean. The entire sermon is this masterclass in how to properly interpret the text. And, like any great rabbi back then, Jesus didn't just lay out his points like a lecture. He wove them into the very fabric of the scriptures his audience already knew by heart. He used these things called eraim, which are basically hints, little nods to Old Testament passages that his listeners would have picked up on instantly. Let's look at the three big ones he drops right before he gets to our frightening verse. All right, clue number one, he starts talking about two gates. One is narrow and leads to life, and the other one's wide and easy, but it leads to destruction. Now, you might think this is a new idea, but it's not. He was pulling from something super famous. See, he's tapping right into the book of Proverbs, which pictures wisdom and folly as two women calling out to people. Lady Wisdom's path is the right one, but Lady Folly's path looks easy and appealing, and it leads straight to death. So Jesus is echoing this exact same choice. That wide gate, that's the deceptive, easy-looking path of folly. Okay, let's keep building this case. Clue number two. Jesus gives this famous warning to beware of false prophets, who look like harmless sheep on the outside but are secretly ravenous wolves. This is probably one of his most famous images, right? But again, he didn't just make it up out of thin air. Nope, he's quoting the prophet Zephaniah, who used the exact same metaphor, evening wolves, to call out the corrupt leaders of Jerusalem. And get this, these were insiders. They were the very judges and prophets who were supposed to be upholding the law, but instead, they were tearing it apart. And that brings us to the final clue. Trees and their fruit. A good tree produces good fruit. A bad tree produces bad fruit. Super simple, right? It's an agricultural metaphor that his audience would have understood in a heartbeat. Why? Because Psalm 1, one of the most famous psalms ever, uses this exact imagery. The righteous person is described as being like a healthy tree that bears fruit. So Jesus is clearly building on a familiar idea. But that leaves a big question. What exactly does he mean by fruit? Okay, this is where it all starts to click. To really understand Jesus' warning, we have to grasp what fruit meant in their world. See, for them, fruit wasn't just about having the right ideas floating around in your head. It was way more tangible. First up, we've got this idea called halakha. It literally means the walk, and it was the word they used to describe the entire lifestyle a person built around their interpretation of the scriptures. It's not just what you believe, it's how you actually walk it out every day. And then there's mitzvot, which simply means deeds or actions. And here's the beautiful connection. Your mitzvot, your actions, are the literal fruit that grows on the tree of your halakha, your way of life. So, and this is the absolute key right here. In their way of thinking, your actions weren't some separate thing from your beliefs. They were the proof of your beliefs. What you did showed what you truly thought. The fruit, well, the fruit doesn't lie. All right, let's recap. We've got the context, we've got the clues, we've got the motive. The gates, the wolves, the fruit, it is all pointing to one very specific group of people. It's time to put it all together and finally unmask the people Jesus was warning about. And you can bet his audience also knew the prophet Jeremiah's classic profile of a false prophet. And it's a dead ringer for what Jesus is describing. They look super religious, but inside they're hypocrites. They preach their own ideas, they tell people exactly what they want to hear, and, most importantly, their actions, their fruit, completely lack God's heart for mercy and humility. So suddenly, the answer becomes crystal clear. The workers of lawlessness are the wolves in sheep's clothing. And the wolves aren't some random outsiders. They are the religious insiders. He's talking about the corrupt priests, the scribes and the Pharisees, who made a big show of their religion, but whose hearts and actions were a million miles away from God.
Okay, so this wasn't just a history lesson. This ancient warning lays out a timeless principle for how to spot true spiritual health and authentic leadership, not just in other people, but in ourselves too. So what does this mean for us today?
The real test of a person's fruit, the real evidence of what they believe, is not going to be found in their powerful sermons or their impressive titles or their big public displays of religion. No, the real test is whether their actions, day in and day out, actually reflect the very heart of the sermon Jesus just gave. Are they people of humility? Do they show mercy? Are they peacemakers? Do they have a genuine hunger for justice and righteousness? That's the good fruit he's talking about. And that really brings us back to the core lesson here. When we're evaluating spiritual leadership, or even just our own spiritual lives, we have to look past the words and the fancy theology and get down to examining the fruit, the mitzvot, the actions. Because at the end of the day, it's what we do that reveals who we truly are. So let's land the plane here. That frightening verse, it turns out, wasn't meant to make people anxious for no reason. It was meant to be a sharp tool for discernment. It forces us to ask a really tough question, not just of our leaders, but of ourselves too. What does our fruit say about our tree?